So remember the characteristics of cartilage. We have the circle-looking structures. They're called lacunae. And inside the lacunae are those cartilage cells. We call them chondrocytes. And then everything that's not inside the lacunae is called the matrix. And depending on what cartilage we're talking about, we can either have a really clean and neat matrix, we can have a bunch of collagen fibers all throughout the matrix, or we can have a bunch of elastic fibers all throughout the matrix. And if this is not ringing a bell, or if I'm going too fast during these last few slides, go back to chapter 4 when we first introduced this, and we looked at each tissue individually, and I showed you pictures and everything. Make sure you review that information. Now remember, similar to epithelial cells, cartilage doesn't really get that much blood flow. It's pretty avascular. So if you were to damage cartilage, it doesn't really heal that well, which is not a good thing. So the three types is hyaline, elastic, fibro. Make sure you know which one's the strongest. Make sure you know which one is the most common or popular. Make sure you know which one is the most stretchy out of these three. And depending on which cartilage we're talking about, they all have unique jobs, but for the most part, it's to protect the joints, right? And to prevent any damage to that bone tissue. So hyaline cartilage, by far the most abundant. When in doubt, hyaline cartilage. And the reason why is because your articular cartilage is hyaline cartilage. So if you have 206 bones, almost every single one of those bones join with another bone, and there's cartilage between those bones. So that's a very large number. The cartilage between your ribs, inside your respiratory system, tip of your nose as well. So this one has a very, very clean and neat matrix. Elastic cartilage. A lot of elastic fibers are found in the matrix, and this stuff is really, really stretchy. We talked about 3 locations where they're at. The main one we want you to know for right now in this module is the outside of the ear. When we get to the last module for the semester, we'll talk about the eustachian tube, and then we'll introduce the epiglottis in more detail next semester. So outside ear, really, really flexible, bendy, twisty. And then we have fibrocartilage, and instead of elastic fibers all throughout the matrix, we have collagen fibers. And remember, the 3 big places that fibrocartilage is located are places where we need the most strength. So between the 2 pubis bones, we have something called the pubic symphysis. Between all of your vertebral bodies, or the bodies of the vertebrae, we have the discs, and they are just mainly filled with collagen fibers, this fibrocartilage. And then we have the meniscus in your knee. That helps with all that weight bearing that your knees have to take on for us. And then for our last slide, we're going to introduce a little bit of new information. So although cartilage doesn't have a great blood flow, it still has to grow, right? It still has to change because some of those cells can die. So there are 2 ways that cartilage grows. One happens generally during our childhood and teenager years, and that is this first one. It's called interstitial growth. And then the second one happens more during adulthood, and that's called appositional growth. So as you can see, the other name for these interstitial is endogenous growth, which endo means inside or within, right? So as you can see, it says the cells within the substance of the tissue divide and secrete additional matrix. So what cells are we talking about here? Well, we're talking about those chondrocytes. Those chondrocytes actually secrete matrix. They are live cells. So the chondrocytes secrete matrix, and then they start spreading out from each other. So literally, how this growth occurs is from the inside out. So picture that we have a square of tissue. I'm going to draw it here at the bottom. We have a square, or a rectangle, and then we have all of these cells secreting this jelly matrix in all different directions. And what that's going to do is increase pressure and forces along the edges, and it's going to force this rectangle to grow in size and get bigger. So it's literally growing from the inside out. And once again, that occurs more so during childhood and our adolescence. Once we become an adult and we continue to be an adult, we go through this other type of cartilage growth called appositional growth or exogenous. And exo obviously meaning outside, right? So this is basically growth from the outside out. So we have something called the perichondrium. Remember, the periosteum is just the outside of bone tissue, all those collagen fibers. The outside of cartilage tissue is called the perichondrium. And all we're doing is, instead of growing from the inside out, let's draw that rectangle again. What we're doing is we're taking the edges and we're just pulling those further apart. So picture like you're posting a picture on social media or something, and you're making the picture larger. So you're pulling or dragging those corners of those sides. So that's exogenous growth. Once again, happens after we're done fully growing. All right, everyone, that wraps up the skeletal tissue chapter. Let your instructor know if you have any questions, and I will see you next time.